هيا بنا نلقاه في يومنا يا سادتي يا كرام سيروا لنيل المنى للخير هيا بنا نلقاه في يومنا يا سادتي يا كرام سيروا لنيل المنى سيروا لنيل المنى.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه الطيبين الطاهرين. We start with the name of Allah. We praise and thank Allah for all of the endowments that He bestowed without Allah being obligated to give anything. And we ask Allah to raise the rank of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam and to protect the nation of Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam from what the Prophet feared for his nation. Thereafter, in the previous session, we talked about the obligations of the guardian and what pertains to ordering his mentally discriminate, prepubescent child, male or female, with prayer, and for that guardian to teach the child or to arrange for the child to be taught the fundamental matters of the religion pertaining to the belief in Allah the Exalted, the belief in the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, matters of what is halal and what is haram and what is obligatory, and even some recommended matters like using the two-stick and the communal obligation of praying in congregation. And we mentioned about the obligation of the Muslim to order his family with the prayer and to order others, even outside of his own blood relatives, with the prayer, whoever he is able to. From that point, we will move on talking about one of the most important matters that pertain to the prayer, which is purification, at Tohara. And among the first matters sought in what pertains to Tohara is the obligation of making Wudu, ablution. Ablution is an obligation, and it is a condition for the validity of the prayer. A condition in this context, when we're talking about the deeds, the acts of worship, when we say a condition, we mean something that is not a part of the deed. However, the deed is not valid without it. It is not a part of the deed. However, the deed is not valid without it. Like wudu for the prayer. Wudu and prayer are two separate acts of worship. However, if or without wudu, one's prayer would not be valid. So, performing wudu is a condition for the validity of the prayer. It is not a part of the prayer itself. However, the prayer would not be valid without it. The wudu itself has its own integrals, and an integral is a part of the deed that the deed is not valid without. So here it differs from a condition because a condition is not a part of the deed itself, whereas an integral is a part of the deed itself. However, the deed would not be valid without it. So if a person neglected any one of the integrals of wudu, the wudu would not be valid. Similarly, if one neglected a condition for an act of worship, then that act of worship would not be valid. But as we've mentioned, the difference is that an integral is a part of the act itself, and a condition is not a part of the act itself. Overall, the obligatory aspects, the integrals of wudu are only 6 matters. 6 matters only. There are numerous recommended optional matters that one may add to the wudu, that they may add to the integrals for the perfection of one's wudu, so that they would get the ultimate reward, the maximum amount of reward, and that their wudu, their ablution, would imitate in every way, in every aspect, the wudu that the Prophet performed. And this, of course, is better. It's more rewardable. It's closer to perfection. However, the wudu would be valid just by completing these 6 integrals. So those recommended aspects, they are not necessary for the validity of wudu. Some people, when they learn, they are not taught the difference between the integrals of wudu and the sunan, the optional recommended aspects of wudu. But here we clarify the difference. It does not mean for one to neglect performing the sunan, the recommended aspects of wudu, the optional matters that pertain to wudu. For the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam encouraged one to perfect one's wudu by performing the integrals along with the sunan, the recommended aspects. And he mentioned about the reward of the one who makes a perfect wudu, that it would be a reason for his small sins to be forgiven. So we're not encouraging for one to just neglect the optional matters, but we are clarifying the arkan, the integrals of the wudu, so that one would be sure to have their deed accepted, insha'Allah ta'ala. Some of the integrals of wudu are known by Quran and Hadith, and some of the integrals of wudu are known by Hadith only. As for washing the face, washing the hands, washing, wet wiping the head, and washing the feet, these are known from the Quran and the Hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As for the integral of the intention and keeping the order, these are known from the Hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The first integral among the integrals of wudu is to have an intention, to make the intention for wudu when the water first touches the face. The intention is a deed of the heart. So one makes their intention in their heart. And the intention is an aim of doing something simultaneously associated with the deed. One has an aim in his heart. He directs his will towards doing something. And this direction of one's will, this aim in the heart, would be at the same time as the beginning of the deed. It would be simultaneous with the beginning of the deed. The deed, the intention is of course necessary. It is an integral for the validity of wudu, so the wudu would not be valid without it. Among the acceptable intentions that one could have for the validity of one's wudu is to intend wudu, simply to intend wudu. If a person intended the obligatory wudu, then this would also be valid. Also, a person could intend to do what makes the prayer permissible. He has in his heart that he's doing what makes the prayer permissible. So when he first starts to wash his face, that would be his intention. If he intended that, then this would be sufficient for the validity of his wudu. Or he could intend something that, religiously speaking, needs for one to have performed wudu to perform it. Like, for example, the prayer. Or, for example, at tawaf, the circumambulation of the Kaaba. That is, he intends to make permissible, to do what makes permissible that which necessitates that one has performed wudu before it. So he intends to do what makes tawaf permissible, for example. Or he intends to do what makes prayer permissible. Or he intends to do what makes holding the book of the Quran, the Mus'haf, permissible. Because these matters, one must be in a state of purification, free of the minor ritual impurity to do them. So if one intends in his heart to do what makes these matters, upon which one must be clear of minor ritual impurity to perform, permissible for themselves, they intend to make one of these matters, to do what makes one of these matters permissible for themselves, then this will be sufficient intention for the wudu. According to the madhab of Imam al-Shafi'i, may Allah the Exalted have mercy on him, the intention for wudu must be at the very beginning of the deed, at the first washing of the face. The wudu has a certain order that it must be performed in, and it starts, the first organ of the body that one washes is the face, according to that order. So since the intention is simultaneously associated with the deed, that is, the intention is established at the very beginning of the deed, and wudu has a necessary order that it must be performed in, then one makes the intention for wudu at the first washing of the face. If a person started to wash the face without any intention for wudu, they didn't have any intention in their heart that would be sufficient for performing wudu, then later they established their intention after they had already washed a part of the face, then they would be obligated to go back and rewash the part of the face that preceded, that they washed, that preceded the intention, that they washed before establishing the intention. According to some other imams, and that is Imam Malik, it is sufficient if one establishes the intention for wudu a short time before the first washing of the face. But according to the Shafi'i school, this is not sufficient. As we said, the intention is an aim in the heart of doing something simultaneously associated with the deed. So one should not allow themselves to be fooled by the whispers of the shaitan or the harmful involuntary thoughts that cross one's mind that would cause one to unnecessarily wash and rewash and rewash and rewash and rewash, to rewash their face while claiming that they're doubting if they have established the proper intention. No, the intention is not a long expression that one conjures in their mind, that they imagine and they say internally, that's like a long, drawn-out expression that they must do. Rather, it's an aim in the heart. So when the person is standing there at the faucet, for example, and he knows that he wants to pray, and he's about to wash his face, and so he puts the water on his face because he knows that he has to do this for the prayer to be permissible. Yani, he's intending in his heart, and he knows internally that he's washing his face to make the prayer permissible, then that is an intention. That is an intention. After establishing the intention, the person would have to wash the whole face. That is the second integral among the integrals of wudu. The second part of wudu that the act of ablution would not be valid without. One must wash the whole face, all of the hair and skin. They don't have to go in their mouth, but they need to wash their lips, what is apparent. And when the mouth is closed. They need to wash their lips, they need to wash the eyelids, but they don't need to go on the eyeballs themselves. Rather, they wash what is apparent. There is a certain boundary of the face. They need to get everything within the boundary. The boundaries of the face are from the normal hairline to the chin and from one ear to the other. The normal hairline, meaning this boundary, this place where the hair usually stops growing or where it usually begins growing from of the head. So this is not considering the circumstance of the person whose hair fell out. Some people, their hair falls out, so their hairline would recede. So this line where the hair starts growing, it would not be where you normally find it. It would be further back. The person is not obligated to wash to that receded hairline. Rather, they would wash to the place where the hair normally starts growing. Likewise, some individuals, they may have hair that grows on their forehead, so it would appear that their hairline is very low. This person would be obligated to wash past where that hair starts and go to the actual normal hairline. So they would wash from the normal hairline to the chin where the two lower jaw bones meet, and from ear to ear, that is from the base of the ear to the other, from one base of the ear to the other. However, it's necessary, it is obligatory for one to add at least a small amount to that obligatory boundary just out of precaution so that they would have certainty that they washed all that was necessary, all what is necessary. So they wash from the normal hairline to the chin and from one ear to the other, all of the hair and skin. When we say wash, it means the water has to flow. So it is not sufficient for one to merely wet his hand without him gathering an amount of water, just to wet his hand and wipe his face until his face appeared wet. That would not be considered a wash. That would be considered a wet wipe. And it's obligatory to wash the face, not to wet wipe the face for wudu. So there must be an amount of water that flows. Whether that water flowed by itself, like a person putting his head under a shower, putting his face in front of the shower head, and the water squirting out and washing all over his face, covering all of the boundaries, and reaching the whole face within all of the boundaries. Or if a person had an amount of water in their hand and they put it on their face and they pushed it around, helping it reach all of what is necessary. They have to wash all of the hair and skin except the man who has a thick beard. The man who has a thick beard, he needs to wash what is apparent of his thick beard and not the skin underneath. The beard is the hair of the lower jawbone. The hair of the lower jawbone. That is the bone upon which the lower row of teeth grow. So we're not talking about the sideburns or the mustache or any other hair on the face, but the hair of the lower jawbone. If this hair, the hair of the lower jawbone, the lihya was thick, then the man is allowed to make the water reach what's apparent of the hair of the lower jawbone, and the beard, and he doesn't need to make sure the water gets to all of the skin underneath. The hair of the lower jawbone, the beard hair, is considered thick if that hair conceals the skin underneath it from the normal distance of conversation. So it doesn't mean very, very close to a person, but it also doesn't mean very, very far away. Rather, the normal distance that would be between two people when they are speaking to one another. The common distance that people stand close to each other when speaking to each other, speaking to one another. So if the beard hair from this distance conceals all of the skin underneath it, then this would be considered a thick beard. And the man with a thick beard would not be obligated to wash all of the skin that is beneath that thick beard. Rather, he would be obligated to make sure that the water reached what's apparent. If the beard hair was not thick, fulfilling the description that I just mentioned for you, then this would be considered a thin beard, and the man would be obligated to make sure that the water reached all of the hair and skin, the hair of the beard, and the skin underneath it. The third integral of wudu is to wash from the fingertips up to and including the elbows, and all that is on it of hair and extra skin. So here, the person would also be obligated to make sure that the water flows. The water has to flow. It doesn't mean that he has to use a lot of water, but he will use a sufficient amount to make sure that water flowed on all of that, from the fingertip up to and including the elbow. So the water has to reach and cover the elbow as well. The third integral of the wudu is the fourth integral of wudu is for one to wet wipe the head, at least one hair within the boundary of the head. So here, we don't mean to wash. Here, when wiping the head, one does not gather an amount of water and pour it on his head, for example, for it to flow down. Rather, one would get his hand wet with new water, not the water that was just used to remove the ritual impurity when he washed his hands up to and including his elbow. Rather, he would get his hand wet with new water, water that did not lift the ritual impurity from his hands. And he would wipe something between the forehead and the base of the skull, what they call the occiput. The normal hairline and the base of the skull. So he must wipe something in between that boundary. Even if it was one hair, or even if he had no hair, he could wipe one part of the head. Yes, it's better to wipe the whole head, but it's sufficient if he wiped even one hair, according to the madhab of Imam al-Shafi'i. May Allah have mercy on him. If a person wiped his head with something other than his hand, it would still be valid. Like if he had a stick and then he got it wet and then put it on his head, touched the wetness that was on that stick to his head, that would also be sufficient for wet wiping. Just to make it clear to the extent that it would be acceptable. As for the dirt that would be, that relates to something else, excuse me. Then the fifth integral of wudu is for one to wash their feet up to and including the ankles, all of the hair and skin, even if the hair was thick. So, when it comes to the hands, up to and including the elbows and the feet, then having thick hair on them would not be a reason for one to abandon reaching all of the skin underneath that hair. And like we mentioned about the face and hands, on the feet, the water must flow. And the person should take good care to make sure that water reached all of those areas, the toes, the underside of the foot, the heel, the ankles, what's beneath and around those ankles, and up to and including the ankle, the top of the foot, in between the toes, and the like. Because if a person missed a spot, if they did not wash any of those parts that are necessary to be washed, then one's wudu would not be valid. If a person fulfilled the conditions for using the footgear, then one would be allowed to wipe over the footgear instead of washing the feet. For one to use the footgear, they must wear something over their feet that covers the entire foot, that is, all of the parts of the foot that are obligatory to be washed for wudu. And what they wear on their feet, it must be strong enough to sustain the walking that is done by the traveler to fulfill his needs and some chores that he would do when traveling. So this would not be something that is very thin, very weak, that would rip apart or fall apart if he was going to do that. Rather, it has to be strong enough and substantial enough to not fall apart if they were worn by the traveler and he walked around to fulfill his needs and to take care of whatever chores he needed as a traveler. Likewise, the hoof, this footgear that one would wipe upon, must be of a type of material that prevents the penetration of water. It doesn't mean that one needs to wear something that is 100% waterproof if he dipped his whole foot into a puddle, a deep puddle, then his foot wouldn't get wet at all, no matter how long he kept his foot in the puddle. No, it needs to be something that prevents the penetration of water normally, like leather, or like patent leather, or like plastic, for example, that is strong enough, obviously. Not like mesh that has many holes in it so that it becomes extremely breathable, or like canvas. Some shoes are made of canvas, which is a fabric. It's a fabric material that does not prevent the penetration of water. Here, when we say it prevents the penetration of water, this does not include like the stitching that is normally done in a shoe. All right, we're not talking about those types of those very small little holes that the stitching makes. This does not prevent the permissibility of using the footgear. Likewise, the footgear would be pure. It would be pure in itself. So it is not something that is made of najis, for example, like pigskin. In addition to that, we said that it would be it would cover the whole area that is obligatory to be washed for wudu. It would prevent the penetration of water. It would be pure in itself, and that it would sustain the walking of the traveler to fulfill his needs, and also that one would wear it after completing wudu, yani after they have completed a full wudu. So one would make wudu and finish from the wudu entirely before applying the first khuf, before wearing the first foot, the first khuf, the first piece of foot gear. They would not, for example, wash their face, wash their hands, wet wipe their head, wash one foot, apply one khuf, then wash the other foot and apply the other khuf. In this case, the wiping over the khuf would not be valid. Rather, one completes the entire wudu, washing both feet at the end, and then he applies the first khuf, then the second. If one applied the khuf, like we mentioned, in an acceptable way, then the person who was not traveling, the resident, would be permitted to wipe over the khuf, wet wipe over the khuf instead of washing the foot for 24 hours from the time of breaking their wudu. So if they made wudu and they applied the khuf, and then they didn't break their wudu for 3 hours, for example, then they would start counting from then until 24 hours later, and so they could wipe on the khuf for that entire duration. They don't start counting from the time when they first apply the khuf itself, or when they put on both of the pieces of foot gear. Rather, the 24 hours is counted from when they break the wudu. And as for the traveler, then they would be permitted to wipe over the khuf for 3 days. They would be permitted to wipe over the khuf for 3 days. The sixth and final integral of wudu is for one to observe the order in performing the wudu. Allah the Exalted revealed in the Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu idha qumtum ila as-salati fawsilu wujuhakum wa aydiyakum ila al-marafiq wamsahu bi ru'usikum wa arjulakum ila al-ka'bayn. So Allah the Exalted, in the ayah pertaining to wudu, He revealed this particular order. When He revealed it, the first thing that was mentioned in the verse was washing the face, then washing the hands was mentioned, then wiping the head was mentioned, part of the head, and then washing the feet was mentioned. And in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ informed his nation, Ibda'u bima bada Allahu bih, which means start with what Allah the Exalted started with. So, Imam al-Shafi'i, according to his madhab, according to his school, it is obligatory upon us, following the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, to perform the act of wudu according to the order in which it was mentioned in the Quran. Starting first with washing the face, that is, having the intention in the heart, and then washing the face first, that would be the first organ that one washes, and then he would wash the hands up to and including the elbows. He would wipe the head, and then he would wash the feet. So keeping the order is the final integral among the integrals of wudu. If an individual broke the order by skipping an integral, for example, then what he would have to do is go back and perform that integral that he skipped, and then perform the integral that comes after it, even if he had already done it, because he made a mistake and skipped what came before it. So if a person had the intention to make wudu, and he started to wash his face with the intention, then he washed his whole face, then he washed his hands, then he washed his feet, so he forgot to wipe his head. Then he would go back and wipe his head, and then wash his feet again to keep the order, like the order that is mentioned in the Quran. Because if he didn't wash his feet again, then he would have had the intention, washed his face, washed his hands, washed his feet, then wiped his head. And that breaks the order that opposes the order that is mentioned in the Quran. And so, according to the madhab of Imam al-Shafi'i, may Allah the Exalted have mercy on him, his wudu would not be valid. And with that, we have completed mentioning the integrals of wudu. May Allah the Exalted guide us to the acceptable deeds. Walhamdulillah wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.
شغف لحسن لقاء وأشواق لجود عطاء.
الحمد لله رب العالمين الذي وفقنا لخدمة طلاب العلم الذين جاءوا من بلاد ومدن مختلفة حبا بعلم الدين. والحمد لله الذي سهل لنا برنامجا يساعد الطالب على الانتقال من مرحلة عدم التكلم باللغة العربية إلى مرحلة القراءة والكتابة والتعبير باللغة العربية.
When I first arrived at Elif, I had no experience speaking Arabic. I knew the letters, the short vowels, and some of the surahs from Al-Quran, but I definitely couldn't hold a conversation in Arabic. الآن أنا مرتاح وأستطيع أن أتكلم وأكتب ما تعلمته بالعربية. Our teachers helped us build and strengthen our foundational skills. First we started with letters, then we moved to words. وقبل أن ندرك ما حصل شرعنا بالتأليف رسائل لأهالينا, all while expressing our thoughts and emotions in Arabic.
With level 1, I have learned to protect my tongue from many mistakes in grammar, morphology, and word usage. The rules and fundamentals that were ingrained during that crucial year guide me to this day in my pursuit of knowledge in Arabic and religious studies. دائما نتكلم باللغة العربية في اللغة الثانية في كل يوم وفي كل حين. الأساتذة يذكروننا بالتكلم باللغة العربية. في هذه السنة ازددنا تلذذا بالحوار معا. حين فهمنا نحو والصرف انطلقنا إلى التفوق في التعبير والتكلم. والحمد لله رب العالمين.
أذكر أول مرة جئت إلى هنا لأبدأ في تعلم اللغة العربية، وكتبت أول امتحان. كان هناك سؤال: لما جئت إلى هنا؟ فما فهمت السؤال جيدا، فأجبت: جئت أمس ليلة. فسبحان الله، منذ تلك المرة حتى الآن كم من علم تعلمته وفائدة حصلت عليها، من تعلم المفردات وكتابة الجمل المفيدة في السنة الأولى. انتقلنا في السنة الثانية إلى الإنشاء وتطبيق القواعد الصرفية والنحوية. زيادة على ذلك، الأساس الذي بني عليه علمنا في اللغة العربية مكننا في فهم الأدب والبلاغة. فما شاء الله الآن صرت أستطيع أن أعبر عن فكرة واحدة بطرق مختلفة.
أي القصة الأولى التي
ما كنت أظن أنني سأدرس في مكان عظيم مثل هذا المعهد. تعلمنا كيف نقرأ ونكتب ونتحدث بالعربية في وقت قصير، لأننا ملأنا أوقاتنا بالقراءة والكتابة والتعبير.
Aside from the educational perspective, something else that kept me pushed to keep learning and sticking around is the community around this mahad.
The camaraderie between us and Elif is apparent. From the first day to the last, you'll never find a shortage of helpful friends and teachers.
Obviously, some days are more difficult than others, but with patience and encouragement from your classmates and your teachers, you realize that every step here is crucial to your success. والنجاح هنا سهل مع تفكير السليم والسلوك الحسن.
وكما تعلمون لدينا الآن في معهد ألف 3 مراحل: المستوى الأول والمستوى الثاني والمستوى الثالث. وإن شاء الله تعالى نعلمكم بأننا سنفتتح في السنة القادمة السنة الرابعة بإذن الله تعالى. إن شاء الله تعالى سندرس فيها ألفية ابن مالك في النحو، وندرس فيها الصرف والبلاغة والأدب والعروض من العلوم النافعة. فنسأل الله تعالى أن يوفقنا لهذا الخير العظيم.